are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joining me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man, we have finally made it. We are at the NBA Finals. Man, what a long journey, but we're finally here. Two teams remain: Golden State Warriors from the Western Conference and the Boston Celtics from the Eastern Conference. And yes, it is my worst nightmare scenario.
Yeah, man. For us, especially for like Raptors fans, I don't like either team, but it is gonna be an entertaining series, I think. And
hopefully.
Game 1 showed us that.
Yeah, Game 1, we're recording this obviously after Game 1 of the NBA Finals, but hopefully we get a good basketball and good competition, because we didn't get that in the conference finals, unfortunately. But
minus the last game.
Yeah, minus
Miami-Boston.
Yeah, but ultimately, again, we're here. We're at the NBA Finals. There's two teams remaining. If I had to, make a quick prediction on who I actually want to win, it's a toss-up, man, because I really don't like either of these teams. I don't want to see Steph Curry get a fourth ring, but at the same time, I don't want to see Boston. But I guess I'll leave the lesser of the two evils for me. I'll let Boston, because I kind of like their team a little better. As hard as it is to say.
I'm going to say Golden State.
But
here's the thing. Shout out Andrew Wiggins. I want Andrew Wiggins to win one. That's number one. But also, just like prediction-wise, I think Golden State just has a better team and just better players at the top, and also a better system.
At the top, for sure, I'd agree. Like, Golden State's top-tier talent is better than Boston's, but, man, I like Boston's play style and their depth, man. We saw it in Game 1. The depth came up big, so...
But again, how many times is that depth going to help?
Well, that's to be seen. But, yes, long story short, we're at the NBA Finals. But continuing actually off of what we were going over for our last few episodes, we're kind of starting to go over some of the what's next or off-season outlook type of episodes, where we break down teams that either were eliminated from the playoffs, and soon we're going to get to teams that didn't actually make the playoffs. And we're starting to talk about what they're going to be doing heading into their offseason. What questions do they have? What could they potentially answer? What could they potentially do to improve their outcome from this past season? And if you haven't checked out last episode, definitely check it out. We did a full breakdown, I believe, for the Philadelphia 76ers and the Phoenix Suns. Definitely a lot to go over in that episode. So if you haven't already done so, check that out. And also subscribe to the show on YouTube, of course, and on all other platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio. Any place you can find a podcast, you can find us with the Up and Under podcast. But on this episode, we're going to be doing a What's Next episode for the Dallas Mavericks and the Miami Heat.
Yeah, so getting into the Miami Heat, the most recent team that was actually eliminated in these playoffs. Now, the Miami Heat finished with the best record in the Eastern Conference, obviously. They finished with a 53-29 record. And they were top 10 in... on both sides of the ball. They had the 10th best offensive rating, 5th best defensive rating, and overall they were 6th in net rating. Now, the Miami Heat definitely had a good season, especially when you talk about all the injuries that occurred for them.
Well, it's also a new team. Like, it was a new core group of guys that were brought together.
Exactly. So, when you're talking about the Miami Heat, they definitely had a good season. I think even for some people, for us, we had them, I think, near the top, basically. But I think for some people, they definitely outperformed expectations. I don't think the consensus was there for the Miami Heat that they were, a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. But they definitely had a good team. They had a good run this season. Like I said, despite injuries, they definitely had a good season.
I think the depth is what really stood out, and how some of their younger guys really kind of broke out and started becoming more consistent. Tyler Hero had a 6th Man of the Year campaign. Max Strus pretty much made Duncan Robinson obsolete, especially playoff time. And Gabe Vincent is another guy. So some of Miami's younger guys, Oladipo started to regain some of his form. Although, again, we'll see what happens with Oladipo. But ultimately speaking, Miami had a good season, and they were good from the start to the finish of the season, which is pretty surprising considering, again, it's pretty much a brand new team.
Exactly. So Miami had a good season. They performed well in the playoffs, but in all honesty, they didn't really face much competition besides the Boston series. If we take a look at their first round series, they faced the Atlanta Hawks. Then they faced the Philadelphia 76ers with Embiid injured, and the rest of the team was just not that great.
Playoff Harden.
Yeah. And so until they faced Boston, where they were kind of outmatched, even though, like I said, they took it 7 games, so they played pretty well. But in terms of championship contending quality, they were just a step below, I think, of what you wanted from a championship contender.
They got blown out way too many times in the conference finals. Now, Jimmy Butler had to put on some heroics to get them to a game 7. And that game 6 was absolutely incredible. Some of the shots that Jimmy hit were fantastic. But ultimately, again, they just weren't at the level that Boston was at this season.
Yeah, exactly. Talking about their offseason, some of their notable free agents. They have Tyler Hero on a team option this year. Now, obviously, I'm going to talk about him a bit later in his contract situation. But long story short, his contract is going to be
Guaranteed
to
pickup.
work. PJ Tucker has a player option for $7 million. It remains to be seen whether he comes back or not. If he decides not to come back, there's going to be a lot of teams that want him, obviously.
I think he'll come back.
Udonis Haslem is basically whether he wants to come back
You'll
or not.
retire, fam.
I mean, if he
42.
just wants to come back and sit on the bench, then he's going to do that in Miami.
Yo,
He's
take
gonna have a spot
$500K.
for him. Markieff Morris, he basically didn't play after he got knocked out by Jokic.
Yo, gone. If you get knocked out that easily and that early and then you're done, bro, get out.
And again, he's the one who started it. So
You can't start a beat like that.
Victor Oladipo is also going to be an unrestricted free agent. Now, his situation, I think, is very interesting considering what happened to him over the past couple of years. He's an all-defensive guy. He's an all-star. Injuries kill him at the end of Indiana. He has a lot of personal, butting heads with a lot of people as well in Indiana. Goes to Houston, declines a massive contract from them. Doesn't really work out in Houston. Comes to Miami. He's injured. Takes a prove-it deal last summer. And then he kind of doesn't play until this last stretch of the season where he started to ramp it up a bit more. And even still, he doesn't look like the Victor Oladipo that we at least once knew, even in OKC. But his situation, I think, is interesting considering nobody really knows what he's going to demand. And I think the market's very hard to gauge for him.
And
as well.
he's going to get a healthy offseason now. Relatively healthy, so he can maybe he can come back with more development. He got some games, and he looked good at moments. There were moments in the playoffs where he looked actually pretty good. Now the question with Miami is, are they going to be able to get him at a number that works for Miami, but also a number that Oladipo would want? I'm assuming the last couple of years he's taken relatively cheaper deals than what he would have liked. So what's that middle ground, and will they come to that, or will another team kind of swoop in and take a gamble on Oladipo?
Yeah, exactly. And then we have Dwayne Dedmon, Caleb Martin. Now, Dwayne Dedmon's another veteran guy that I think was a good locker room presence for them. He had his moments of production. But again, just another end of the bench player. Caleb Martin was a surprising story this season. He was on a 2-way deal, and then he played so well that Miami converted it to a standard deal, I think. And again, he's just one of those guys that's good for an end of the bench option, brings that energy, plays tough, quote unquote. And then we have 3 non-guaranteed options for next year, or non-guaranteed contracts for next year, which are Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, and Omer Yurtseven, which I think all 3 of them will be, good for the contracts next year.
I was very impressed with Max Strus in terms of, he went from a guy I was who is this guy, to now I'm like, oh damn, he can shoot. This guy, he's so much better. He can shoot off the dribble. He can shoot off the catch. Very consistent. When this guy gets hot, he gets rolling very quickly. And then when you factor in that this guy actually is semi-athletic, so he can do a lot more for you.
He can do putbacks and stuff. He's done it.
He can stay on the court in big moments. That's the best thing about him. He's a shooter, but you can play him in big moments. And then Gabe Vincent, he really came out of the solid backup point guard, to be honest with you, especially with Lowry kind of in and out of the lineup.
I think the Olympic experience really helped him as well.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Playing for Nigeria. Shout out to, the whole Nigerian team, Precious Chua.
They beat Team USA, so.
Yeah. And then Omer Yurtseven, he had his flashes as a rookie in the season. He looked good at times, obviously, with Bam, Dwayne Dedmon, other guys there. He's not going to really play much. But he was, he looks to be a serviceable young player for them moving forward.
Yep.
Speaking about Max Strus in particular, you mentioned his ability to stay on the floor and actually do things outside of his shooting ability. And that's where we talk about a guy like Duncan Robinson. Moving on to the Miami Heat's team needs. They got to get rid of Duncan Robinson, which is funny because they just signed him to a $90 million deal. And we literally said this last offseason.
It was an overpay.
Yeah, you can go back to our episode last season where we talked about the Miami Heat. It was an overpay. Granted, it was kind of something they semi had to do at the time. But again, it doesn't look like a good contract at all. No. Especially when you factor in he averaged 11 points on 37% three-point shooting this season. He didn't really play much. He had one good game in the playoffs where he broke a record for the most efficient game of all time, and then didn't play after that at all. And that's basically what you get when you have Duncan Robinson. He's a standard, typical three-point shooter who, when he's able to get his shots off, he's amazing on the court for you. But the problem is when he's not being able to do that, especially as a non-athletic guy, then you have a huge problem because he's going to get hunted on defense. And on offense, he's not going to really do much besides space the floor and shoot the ball. He's not going to be able to take it off the dribble. He's not going to be able to attack the paint off the dribble. So what are you left with? Which is why, we talk about a guy like Max Strus who can do everything that Duncan Robinson does at a much better level and can do a lot more than Duncan Robinson. You're paying Duncan Robinson exactly $74 million guaranteed. Or the last year is not fully guaranteed, but you basically have him on the books for $74 million, minimum $60 million basically.
Honestly, for me with Duncan Robinson, and this is something that I personally called a lot. You take away the 3-point shot, what do you got? What do you got? You don't got a defender. You don't got a guy who can pass. So what really is he? He can't attack the basket. So, and that's the problem. When you're paying a guy like that $90 million, it's the same thing that happened with Davis Bertans. It's legitimately the same way that happened. And you're seeing what happened with him. And we'll talk about him a little later on. But ultimately, it's going to be difficult for Miami to move this contract. Maybe a team with some cap space can take a flyer on him, but definitely a tough one to move.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in a system like Miami where they pride themselves on defense, and if you're not playing defense like Nick Nurse, Eric Spoelstra is not going to play you, right? So, unfortunately, that's the reality of what Duncan Robinson is. Now, again, like I said, they have to move him because they're already $13 million over the cap. And as I mentioned, they're going to have to pay Tyler Hero. His contract extension is coming up unless he becomes a restricted free agent. And in that case, Miami will have to pay him either way. So, Miami has to pay Tyler Hero, who is, one of their core pieces moving forward. Guys like Gabe Vincent and whatnot are going to want contracts as well. And then if you're also looking to reacquire a guy like PJ Tucker or grab other veterans who are, who will extend your championship contention window, you're going to need that money to pay someone else and not Duncan Robinson. Not to mention Max Strus, right? Miami also needs some interior presence. Now, again, Bam Adebayo is a really good center. Don't get me wrong. He's all NBA type of center. But the issue is he's 6'8". He's limited in that capacity. And Miami Heat fans will attest to this. Bam is good, and then they have a lot of frustrations with Bam from time to time. Number one, his aggressiveness issues on offense. Yeah. And then number two, he's a good defender, and he's probably the most switchable center in the league. But he has issues defending the rim just because he's not big enough, right? Especially when you have a big center on him, guarding him or playing against him on offense.
Like an Embiid.
Exactly. Or a Jokic. He has issues. The Miami Heat were 22nd in total rebounding. And that has a lot to do with a guy like Bam Adebayo, who's, again, not really a big center.
Yeah, I think with Bam, again, I saw the defensive prowess. I definitely saw the switchability. That's all great. But I think for me, my biggest problem with him is the lack of assertiveness. At times, there were times, besides in the conference final, there's only one game where he actually exploded and scored over 20. And that was the game that Miami won.
He had two, I think. He had two.
Regardless, he was basically invisible on offense when he was supposed to be a very key contributor so that Jimmy Butler didn't have to carry the load because Jimmy himself was battered up. And ultimately, Bam couldn't do that.
Again, Bam is the one thing you can say about him on offense is that he's a good passer, but when you don't have any sort of jumper alongside your passing, those passing lanes get clogged up a lot more, right? And he hasn't really been able to show that he can shoot at all outside of the paint. And even then, he has issues, finishing inside the paint. Um, the Miami Heat need a bigger star than Jimmy Butler if they want to contend. Now, again, Jimmy Butler is great, especially in the playoffs. Regular season, he kind of just doesn't really care about the regular season. But like I said, if the Miami Heat want to be able to contend, which is where they are right now as a franchise, they need to have a better star than Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler's not going to be able to win you a championship as a first option. And again, this leads to some of their offensive issues. Miami famously was probably the worst offensive team in that last stretch of the playoffs. Especially if we're talking about the last 4 teams that were left in the playoffs, Miami was definitely the worst offensive team by far. I think B-Ball Breakdown had a great video on, their offensive issues. But again, when your best player is Jimmy Butler, you're not going to be able to win a championship with that. For example, they're a good 3-point shooting team. They were first in efficiency, but they don't attempt enough. They're 14th in, 3-point shooting. That has a lot to do with a guy like Jimmy Butler who can't really shoot threes. And then Bam Adebayo doesn't stretch the floor either at the center position. They were 26th in 2-point attempts and 17th in percentage in those 2-pointers. Right? Again, Jimmy Butler's not really a good shooter even in the mid-range. And then the rest of those guys are not going to shoot mid-range jumpers either. And then they were 13th in field goal percentage. So overall, despite the fact that they had the 10th best offensive rating in the league, they were not a great offensive team, especially when you talk about that upper echelon of contenders. They're kind of capped in that regard.
Yeah, I would say maybe if you don't have to get a number 1 option, you can kind of get like a 1B or sort of a close to a secondary star for Jimmy Butler. Because I don't think Bam is that. I think Bam is a 3rd star, maybe a 4th guy at best. But maybe getting a secondary guy, and you'll talk about this a little later, but getting that secondary guy might be helpful to take some load off Jimmy Butler because he's not getting any younger and the injuries are piling up.
Yeah, speaking of getting a second guy, I think like one of the things that Miami needs to look out for is swinging for a trade, right? Guys like, I'll talk about this a bit later as well, guys like Bradley Beal. Even a guy like Devin Booker, I was thinking about in a couple of years when CP3 is not playing anymore. Where does that leave him in Phoenix? It's a possibility. Donovan Mitchell. We know if there's one thing, if there's one thing that Miami can do and that Pat Riley has shown that he can do, it's grab guys out of nowhere, right? We know that for a fact. The mob boss will do what he does.
Donovan Mitchell is interesting, especially considering his connection to Dwayne Wade.
Exactly.
So that one I'd keep an eye on.
Well, I mean, Dwayne Wade's technically in Utah right now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it could happen.
It could happen.
The Godfather is there.
Again, connecting off of my last point, they also need to get a bit younger. Kyle Lowry is 35, and I think, well, not even just the Tampa season, because the Tampa season he kind of only played like half the games, but this year specifically, he started to look like he's 35, right? Especially when you talk about his production in the playoffs and his injury history this past season. Jimmy Butler is also 32. He plays a lot more. He plays like he's older than 32, to be honest.
A lot of the key guys are well over 30. Like PJ Tucker's 37. Dwayne Dedmon's 32 or 30 or something like that.
Again, this is where the younger core of guys like Tyler Hero, Max Strus, Bam Adebayo come in, where they have building blocks to build off of, but they don't have that guy that can take them to that next level moving forward after, some of the older players start to,
They don't have a guy to replace Butler. Like, you need that guy. Once you have that guy, then you're set for your future.
Speaking of drafts, they have the 27th pick this year, so, I mean, they can do something with that. And then, potential moves that they can pull off this offseason. I was talking about swinging a trade. I don't think it's going to happen this year just because I don't think there's anything realistic this year. Besides maybe Bradley Beal, that is a possibility. But like I just said, I don't know if Bradley Beal takes you over the top, but to Hani's point, he definitely provides like a 1B kind of option for the Miami Heat.
I don't mind the Bradley Beal option because I think he takes scoring load off of Jimmy Butler. I don't think he will hurt the defense, especially under the Miami system. And then factoring in, you have the Duncan Robinson contract that you can trade over to Washington. Plus, of course, you'll have to put in some other assets in there. But it could work. I'm not saying that it is for sure going to make the Heat dramatically better, but it's not going to make them worse by any stretch of the means.
I alluded to Donovan Mitchell as well before. That whole situation in Utah is a possibility, something to monitor. And then Devin Booker, not right now,
Unlikely.
obviously, but something down the line possibly. Some other guys that Miami could trade for, not necessarily stars, but guys that can fill out your roster are KCP and Jeremy Grant. Both guys who will probably not stay on their current teams by the end of the season. So yeah, KCP would definitely be a good role player. Same with Jeremy Grant. They would definitely fit right into Miami and their defensive structure and their offensive system. Some free agents right now that they could go after. Gary Harris, I think he would fit in well in Miami. The 3-point shooting issues. Hopefully he starts to retain that back a bit more. But the main thing is his defense, perimeter defense. He's still a very good defender. JaVale McGee, if you're talking about, center depth and bringing in a bigger center into the lineup, JaVale McGee is definitely one, though, again, he will be highly sought after. And then 2 more centers, Dwight Howard, Bismack Biyombo, just guys that can get the dirty work done. Dwight Howard, especially if you're talking about a big guy, Dwight Howard's like one of the biggest guys in the league.
Championship experience.
Bismack Biyombo is kind of like the same size as Bam, but he's a bit tougher.
I like Dwight, honestly, for them. Dwight might not be he'd be probably definitely more attainable. And I think he fits Miami, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Like Dwight Howard's an interesting option. And then there's 2 players that I want to mention who are on player options, both from the Milwaukee Bucks, Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis. Now, it remains to be seen whether they resign. Both players obviously love in Milwaukee. Bobby Portis basically has like a cult following in Milwaukee at this point.
Bobby Portis is too soft in Miami. Heat culture would eat him alive.
But I don't know, man. I disagree. I think Bobby Portis could be good in Miami. Same with Pat Connaughton. They're both on player options. I think they will demand bigger contracts. It's just that I think they have good situations in Milwaukee. I don't think they would necessarily want to, leave those situations. But overall, the thing with Miami is they're kind of stuck in this middle phase that I think, for example, like the Raptors were in a couple of years ago. Though, again, Miami has made it farther than the Raptors did at that stage. Miami made it to the finals, bubble season. But, Miami's stuck in a stage right now where they're really, really good, but they're not... They're not that type of, like, the Golden State Warriors, the Boston Celtics.
They're at the cusp.
They're right there, but they're not able to get over the hump, I think. And so it leaves Miami in an interesting position of what they want to do moving forward. But if there's a person that I trust, it's Pat Riley.
Yeah, for sure. Bringing us into the Dallas Mavericks. Now, the Dallas Mavericks had a pretty solid season, man. They finished with a 52-30 record, 4th in the Western Conference. They finished 15th in offensive rating, 6th in defensive rating, 7th in net rating. They finished with a top 4 seed, which first and foremost, we were very surprised about, considering the fact that new coach. Did we really trust Jason Kidd? Not really. They had major roster changes in the middle of the season. Obviously, they traded Porzingis for Dinwiddie and all that great stuff. Luka had to basically play in shape, but he still ended up being an all-NBA caliber player, as he is, spectacular in the playoffs. And honestly, the Mavs defense dramatically improved under Jason Kidd, which is very surprising for us to say, but it's definitely true. They were the 6th best defense in the league this past season.
Especially when you look at what they did against Phoenix, like to stifle an offense like Phoenix the way they did, and you can check out there's a lot of good breakdowns of their defense, but they're I have to give respect to Jason Kidd because that was some good defense that they played.
Yeah, for sure. And then they even unlocked guys like Jalen Brunson, who had emerged as a solid 2-way option, especially a playoff performer. Now, granted, contract season, we'll get to that in a little bit, but he was still very good for them. Spencer Dinwiddie even bounced back after having a pretty bad start with the Washington Wizards to the season. Coming to Dallas, he played pretty well with them, So that was great. And again, you were talking about their playoff run. Now, they made it to the conference finals, which
nobody saw coming.
Nobody saw the Dallas Mavericks. We didn't even think the Mavericks were going to get out of the first round. But they were able to beat Utah in 6, despite not having Luka for games 1 and 2. They upset the Phoenix Suns. They basically blew the Suns out in Game 7 in Phoenix.
They literally... That was the craziest, I think, outcome in a long time that I've seen.
Yeah, It's a pretty embarrassing performance by the Phoenix Suns. Luka absolutely took over in that series and basically, paved the way for the Mavs to get to the conference
Well, I
finals.
mean, the whole team as a whole, though, not even just Luca. Guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, Jalen Brunson, Reggie Bullock, like everyone played really well.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a great effort by them. And then ultimately, they got to the conference finals. They went up against Golden State, and they weren't a match. They weren't a match for the Golden State Warriors. But I think my biggest takeaway is the Mavs had a great season, but they're still a one-man team. They're gonna go as far as Luka Doncic carries them, and I think Luka kind of just burned out and ran out of gas when he faced the Warriors. But the Mavs had a pretty good season for them overall. Now, some of the notable free agents this offseason, obviously the biggest one is Jalen Brunson, who is an unrestricted free agent. He's for sure going to be paid. By who exactly? We will get into that. Trey Burke has a player option. He may or may not take it. Maxi Kleba has a non-guaranteed $9 million. I think the Mavs will probably keep him, but again, money is definitely going to be a concern. And Theo Pinson is an unrestricted free agent as well. Which brings us into the needs for the Mavs heading into this offseason. And we just alluded to it. The first need, probably the most important need for the Mavs this offseason, is to re-sign Jalen Brunson. Now, Jalen Brunson, he really emerged as a great number 2 or number 3 option next to Luka Doncic. And after a solid playoff performance, like he was basically their second leading scorer in playoff points per game, he deserves a new contract. He deserves to get paid. And I think the Mavs should do whatever they can to retain him. Because not only is he a great floor general, he's a good playmaker. He can score off the dribble, spread the floor. But he also plays some good defense as well. So I've always liked Jalen Brunson since he was drafted. So I think the Mavs should definitely try to do what they can to re-sign him.
I mean, he's a good fit with Luka as well.
Exactly.
He plays off of Luka well. Luka can play decently off of him. Now, Luka isn't really a great offensive off-ball player, but he definitely fits well with Brunson. And then when you're talking about, for example, like height isn't really an issue because Jalen Brunson's shorter, but Luka's taller, right? Yeah. So I think they fit really well.
No, they definitely do. I think the biggest concern for the Mavs is it'll just come down to money, and if the Mavs can really afford him. Bringing me into the second thing the Mavs need to do in this offseason, they need to free up some money. And by that, I mean you got to get rid of one of Spencer Dinwiddie, Davis Bertans, or Tim Hardaway Jr. Each of these players make between $16 to $19 million over the next 3 seasons. And if the Mavs want to pay a guy like Jalen Brunson what he's worth, and to be fair, he's worth in that, anywhere between that $17 to $22 million a season range, they're going to have to get some flexibility to do that. And moving off of one of these other contracts is going to be their best bet to do so. Now, the best option is to move Davis Bertans, who is honestly at this point just stealing money from whatever team he's on, because he's not making his shots.
He did play better for the Mavs. He played more inspired. He actually played defense.
Well, there's a first.
And Jason Kidd unlocked some of his offensive abilities a bit more. So I'll say like he played solid for the Mavs at times, but yeah, like he's getting paid way too much.
Is it worth $16 million a season for the next 3 years? No. So obviously he would probably be the best guy to trade, but again, like the Duncan Robinson situation, would it be easy to move that contract? Yet to be seen. I think Dinwiddie is probably the best in terms of value. Like he will probably get you the most out of him, but because honestly, I think you can get someone to replace what Dinwiddie does for a lot cheaper. But it really kind of comes down to what type of offer you're going to get for Dinwiddie. But ultimately, if you want to dump one of these guys or both or 2 guys out of these, I would definitely think that's a better option because it will enable them to make more moves on top of, paying Jalen Brunson. And bringing us into some other moves they got to make. The next thing I think they need to do is they need to get a starting caliber center, or at least a bigger center than Dwight Powell. Dwight Powell, a decent player, Canadian, Team Canada guy, but he's undersized and is limited offensively. Like, there isn't a ton that Dwight Powell can do against bigger centers, and offensively, he's basically just a lob threat. Like, he really can't do much of anything else, and it leaves the Mavs with a lot less options to play with. They are basically forced to go small every single time, and they don't have anyone else bigger to go up against those bigger centers. I think Golden State really took advantage of that with Draymond and Kevon Looney just feasting inside, getting
and
offensive
Wiggins
rebounds.
too. They really destroyed them on the boards.
Yeah,
That was basically the series.
And it was big because, again, with Golden State, that even if they got that initial stop, you can't give a team like Golden State multiple chances to score. They're just gonna ultimately keep burning you for that, and that's exactly what happened to the Mavs. So I think getting a bigger center, or at least a starting caliber center, in my opinion, is going to be something they have to look at this offseason. Another thing they need to look into is they need to get a consistent bench scorer who can create. Now, Spencer Dinwiddie kind of molded himself into that, but again, when you're paying $17 million to a guy to score off your bench consistently, it's not ideally the best thing in the world. Now, the problem with the Mavs is that they're too reliant on Luka Doncic, as we all know. Now, Luka's fantastic, but what do you do when Luka actually sits on the bench? And that's something that they need to address. Now, Jalen Brunson did a great job of filling that void and really being that sort of that go-to creator option while Luka sat. But again, what happens when Jalen Brunson sits?
I will say, in regard to that option, I think there is some. If we want to talk about Luka getting better on offense, I think that is one area that he needs to also improve on. Just because we talk about Luka and the Dallas Mavericks being a one-man team, but I think also having a guy that can play better off of the ball will enable Dallas to have more options on who to bring in, because they're also very limited on who they can bring in. Because if you bring in a guy who's good on the ball, he's not really going to be playing on the ball because Luka's going to be dominating, and Luka is not being optimized when he's off of the ball. And that's, I think, an area that, if you want to talk about areas of improvement for Luka Doncic as an offensive player, I think that's one area definitely the Mavs could work on with him.
Yeah, no, he can definitely become a better off-ball player, but I think in terms of a player they can attain, getting a guy who specifically plays off the bench while Luka sits, I think would be the most ideal. And also the fact that they have too many one-dimensional players on the roster. Like, they either have guys that can shoot or defend, but not a guys that can really create for themselves. And that's something that they're going to need to address in the offseason. And finally, this is something that we've been saying now for a few seasons, but it's been apparent, especially this past season. They need to get a second star for Luka Doncic. And I know this is easier said than done. It's not very easy to get that secondary star. But man, Luka's been carrying this team on his back basically since he got into the league, and he hasn't had much help. Jalen Brunson did a great job this past season, but again, he's more of a number 3 option at best, in my opinion. Now, he could get better. He could surprise us and be better than that, but as of right now, he's pretty much at a 3rd option on the team. Now, which brings us into their draft needs. Now, right now, they have the 26th pick in the draft. They could ultimately trade the pick, but it's a late first rounder, so take what you will with that. They can flip it, they can keep it. Really not going to do much in the grand scheme of things. And finally, some potential free agents. Now, this is the thing with the Mavs. Luka Doncic's extension kicks in next season, so that Supermax extension is going to kick in. So it kind of limits what the Mavs can do. But if they can free up the money, like we talked about earlier, getting rid of some of those guys that aren't really doing much for you, and maybe replacing them with some key guys, you might be able to make things work. For example, you could go after a player like Zach LaVine, who's an unrestricted free agent. Now, there have been reports that he may leave Chicago, especially considering the team kind of became more of DeMar DeRozan's team,
And also they're kind of capped at what they are.
Yeah.
I don't really see much ways they can get better moving forward. Now, again, Vucevic, they would probably have to trade Vucevic. But again, if DeMar DeRozan is your co-star, again, that's cool, but yeah.
Yeah, no. But it could be possible, although very unlikely to see if Zach LaVine would even end up in Dallas. But hey, again, Mark Cuban was pretty willing to pay the luxury tax if he's able to get a guy who he knows he can win with. So that's number one. The second guy is obviously Gary Harris. We've talked about him in a few episodes, but he seems like that type of guy who you can bring in for a relatively affordable deal. He can fit. Ideally, if the 3-point shot comes back, he can be a serviceable player. He's a decent defender, so he could fit pretty well, especially being that I think that bench scorer that I'm thinking of for the Mavs. So Gary Harris would definitely be great. Another guy would be Yusuf Nurkic. I think getting that starting caliber center for Luka. Now the thing with Nurkic, A is health, and B, he's not the best guy defensively. But in terms of,
Well, he's not really a shooter either.
and he's not a shooter either, but I think in terms of a pure pick and roll guy for Luka Doncic, and just again having that bigger body available, I think Nurkic would definitely be a great option for the Dallas Mavericks. Another guy would be Chris Boucher. Now Boucher obviously came off of a decent year with the Raptors again, but we know what Chris Boucher is at this point. He won't be very expensive, but he also can be a good scoring or a good role player option for you, especially if you learn to use him in the correct way. He can definitely be serviceable for you. Another guy, very unlikely, but I thought I'd throw him in anyways, but DeAndre Ayton.
This, I think, would be the best option for the Mavs. If you're talking about a bigger guy who won't clog the paint for Luka Doncic, who will be a great pick and roll player alongside him, and who can also get his own touches and get his own post-ups and play a really good defense. And, like I said, the best fit possible alongside Luka Doncic, I think this might be like the best fit possible alongside Luka Doncic.
Yeah, I think the question mark is, A, how are they going to make the money work, which they could use like a Dinwiddie contract and maybe some picks to sweeten it for Phoenix. That could work. Again, Dinwiddie didn't play poorly, and I think he might be able to do some things in Phoenix. But ultimately, would Phoenix be willing to be able to give DeAndre into a conference rival, and also for the fact that again he's an RFA, like you kind of want to keep him. So DeAndre is an interesting one. Another guy would be Thomas Bryant. Thomas Bryant, obviously an unrestricted free agent. He would be interesting just from the standpoint that, again, he has a potential. Like he's shown potential to grow. He's shown potential to be better. And, the only concern is coming off that ACL injury. Like, how good is he going to be? But, he's not going to be as expensive as most people think he's going to be. So, he's an interesting option. Another guy would be Victor Oladipo. Now, this is where a team like, for instance, Dallas would take a flyer on Victor Oladipo because, again, you can pay him $12 to $15 million and for a season or two, and he can realistically be that second guy next to Luka Doncic, and you can have a guy like Brunson. So that's a pretty good, interesting option for me. I actually kind of like this for the Mavs because I think he's approachable. I think personally Victor Oladipo wouldn't be interested in Dallas, but I think something could work out there for sure. And then finally, some trade options if they wanted to go the trade route. First off, going after a guy like KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He'd be a good role player. He'd be one of those like guys you can definitely get those off ball kind of guys who would play great next to Luka Doncic.
Basically adding to like Dorian Finney-Smith or Reggie Bullock.
Yeah, exactly. Having another guy like that. I think Jeremy Grant is also an interesting one if you wanted to look at trade options because he's very attainable. He's on an expiring deal next season, and he's gonna be he'd be a great two-way guy. Again, you're looking for that number 2 guy. Jeremy Grant can be that 2 guy for you. So he's interesting. And then of course Bradley Beal. More unlikely because obviously they just made a big deal with the Wizards. And I don't think the Wizards want any of their guys back. But no, Bradley Beal will definitely be great next to Luka Doncic. But overall the Mavs, they have options, but the clock has now begun for them to place a competitive team around Luka Doncic. And now that they made a conference finals, it's time to start building off of this. And I know Mark Cuban is not a patient guy, so he's going to want to win, and he wants to win right now. But we'll see what happens with the Dallas Mavericks. Bringing us finally into the up and under segment for this week. Pretty eventful couple of weeks. Obviously, the NBA Finals, a little bit of a dull period that, they had to fill some time with stories and rumors and God knows what. But first and foremost, are you up or under on Tyler Hero of the Miami Heat saying that he feels that he's earned a starting role? Now, he's been on a bench role this past season, 6th Man of the Year candidate. Did he win it? I think, yeah, he won 6th Man of the Year. So, but now he feels like he wants to be a starter. Are you up or under on him saying that?
I'm up on it because I agree with him. I don't know if it's necessarily... Like, I like having a guy like Tyler Hero off of the bench if I'm the Miami Heat. But I definitely understand where he's coming from, too. It's going to be a contract year for him. Guys want to get paid. And like I was talking about earlier in the episode about Kyle Lowry kind of looks 35 now. right? Especially
He's
in the
going to be
playoffs.
36 starting next season.
And would it be the worst thing for him to come off the bench as their like backup point guard?
The problem is he makes $30 million. You can't have
That's
a
the
$30 million
problem.
guy
But
come off the
again,
bench.
You got to prioritize your future, and your future is Tyler Hero, not Kyle Lowry, right? And again, I think Kyle Lowry at this stage of his career would accept that. I don't think he would accept that.
So here's what I would combat with Tyler Hero too. I would say, listen, if you give me one more 6 man of the year level campaign, you give me this consistency or better, then I'd put you as a starter. I think that's fair because I can't go off of one good year and then end up giving you the keys and then for you to be shit. You know, that's literally what we saw with Julius Randle. Now, there's still time for Randle to bounce back, but again, you saw what happened. Defenses started to figure you out, and things weren't the same as they were in the season that you did well. So now the teams have a better read on what Tyler Hero can and can't do. What are you going to do now? So I would be more on a prove it sort of level.
I think it also, like I said, it heavily depends on how Kyle Lowry looks. If Kyle Lowry does not look good to start the first quarter of the season, I think Tyler Hero will have that starting job.
And I think health and personal issues definitely affected Lowry because typically Lowry is relatively consistent. So we'll see what happens next season, but yeah, I'm a little hesitant on letting Tyler Hero become a starter.
Next up, are you up or under on LeBron James becoming the first active NBA player to reach a net worth of $1 billion? Now, Forbes reported this, I think yesterday it was, so Thursday the 2nd. So are you up or under on this?
I mean, I'm up on it. I mean, congrats to LeBron for being the first active player to become a billionaire. But man, these guys make way too much money, man. Like, holy.
But again, the one thing I will say is at least LeBron had to come up. You know, like he actually had to like.
Yeah, and again, LeBron, and it's the fact that he's in LA too. He's like basically doubled his net worth since he's been in LA. So, the business ventures, like LeBron's becoming a business mogul, preparing for that end of the career life. So, good for LeBron. Definitely doing what he's supposed to do. Next up, are you up or under? Nikola Jokic will sign his Supermax extension with the Denver Nuggets, a 5-year deal with $260 million.
I mean, I'm up on it because he deserves the best center.
Back-to-back MVPs.
Yeah, back-to-back MVPs, first center to do that since Shaq.
Carried the team.
Well, Shaq didn't win back-to-back, but like first center to win MVP since Shaq, and he did it.
Carried the team since to the playoffs.
Best passing center of all time. One of the best offensive centers of all time, easily.
Fantastic player.
The only thing is, I just don't like the Supermax. And in the CBA, I think the Supermax will be gone.
It should go.
It will be gone because
it's
at this point,
more damage.
Especially like for Denver, what can Denver do now? Like
nothing.
Denver literally cannot do anything.
This
they
is
have
their
three
team.
guys that are on $150+ million deals.
This is their team. If they can't win with this team, one of these guys are getting shipped out, and it's not going to be Jokic. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, the good thing about Denver fans is that Nikola Jokic is not the type of guy that would ask for a trade.
No,
he's gonna be one of those guys that stays with the Denver Nuggets.
He's like a Giannis, pretty much.
Yeah, and again, he's gonna stay there until he retires. But again, the Denver Nuggets are trying to win right now as well, so it kind of caps them on what they can do. But again, if there's anybody that deserves this, Nikola Jokic, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
Next up, are you up or under on Kenny Atkinson being reported as the front runner to land the Charlotte Hornets head coaching job?
I'm up on it. I've liked Kenny Atkinson from the job that he did in Brooklyn. I thought he definitely was scapegoated. He was basically unfairly taken out of Brooklyn. Now, I think he also left on his own accord as well.
There was some issues.
There was something going on. I think he's had some personal issues. But ultimately, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving didn't want to play for Kenny Atkinson, so that was a quick you're out of here sort of thing. But I've always liked Kenny Atkinson as a coach, and I think he would be great for Charlotte, a young Charlotte team, because that's kind of what he does. He builds up a culture, he builds up a good foundation for a team, and that's what Charlotte does. They have had a great start with James Borrego, and I was surprised he got fired, to be honest with you.
Not really. Charlotte kind of tuned him out at the end. And again, he's like a good guy to get starting, but when you got to games like the play-in games, it was clear that he was definitely outmatched in those games. So again, I think Kenny Atkinson would be a good coach for that role.
I definitely like him. Moving on, next up, are you up or under on the Minnesota Timberwolves hiring Tim Connolly as their president of basketball operations, taking him away from the Denver Nuggets?
I'm up on it. Minnesota's off to I think Minnesota's on the right track, and that's the first time I've ever said that since I have been alive, basically.
It's called securing the bag with Tim Connolly.
I think he even got like an option in some sort of like I think it was a bonus within his contract based on the team's value, if I remember correctly. It was something like that. So he doesn't just have like a president role. Like he's majorly involved in the new organization that's gonna be run by Alex Rodriguez and company, A-Rod. But yeah, that's definitely a good pickup for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Like I said, they're on the right track. They have their coach now in Chris Finch. They have their young stars in Kat and Anthony Edwards, especially. They have a good team around them, and now they're securing the front office, right? They're building off of what Garson Rosas started. Obviously, he got booted out because he wasn't smart. But
they're also getting smart guys in the room. Like you got Chris Finch, smart guy in the room. Now you're getting Tim Connolly. He did a great job in Denver. Now you're bringing him into Minnesota to see what he can do. But you're bringing in the right guys. So it's good on Minnesota. They're finally doing the right things. And it's amazing.
Yeah. And finally, are you up or under on the Los Angeles Lakers hiring Darvin Ham as their new head coach?
I'm up on it because I think they made the right choice to hiring an up-and-coming guy who's paid his due, the guy who respected by players, of course. Giannis gave him a very high praise. We'll see what he does with the Lakers. Obviously, again, you're not getting prime LeBron. You're getting an older LeBron. Will you be able to work with Russell Westbrook?
You're also having Anthony Day-to-Day Davis.
Pretty much. So what will you do? And again, it's a tough place to be in as a coach, but there's not really any pressure on him. The Lakers can't scapegoat him because again, they did basically take a chance on him. So, I like it. I think it's great. I really like the fact that they're letting him pick his own staff. They're not keeping Kurt Rambis in the room. Like, why is Kurt Rambis in coaching meetings?
I mean, here's the thing.
Look at his coaching record.
Listen, Kurt Rambis and his wife are still gonna be in the room anyways.
No. But he's not gonna be in the coaching room and that stuff and thing.
Well, he's gonna be in the ownership room.
That's fine. Stay in the ownership box. Be with Pelinka, but stay out of Darvin Ham's way. Let him do his job, and then you evaluate him from there. But I also think Jeannie Buss is really proving herself not to be a great owner. I think she's letting a lot of things happen that should not be happening. She's letting too many people get into her ear.
Shout out Linda Rambis.
She does not have control over her franchise. And that's starting to become more and more apparent.
Again, that's
the more the Lakers fail.
That's been an issue with the Lakers. Again, LeBron basically saved the Lakers franchise because they've been literally one of the worst run franchises in the past decade. And that
technically Kobe was holding them up for the longest time.
Well, again, all of this started after Jerry Buss died, right? So they've had a bunch of issues in terms of organization since then. But speaking about Darvin Ham, I think this is the best guy you could have gone for the job, right? Not many people want to take the job, but Darvin Ham took it. Like you mentioned, relatable coach to players. He's basically their age almost, right? Charles Barkley said he's like the same age as them.
I mean,
and
he played against LeBron too.
Yeah, again, he's a 2000s player, right? So I think, and everyone always talks highly of him. So I think this is the best guy who could have gone for the job.
Also, like half the league's coaches are now black. Just pointing that out there.
Yeah, random fact. But yeah, I think that's the best guy who could have gone for the job. Now again, will the Lakers be better? I think they will be better. I don't know how good they're gonna be.
They need to get a new roster.
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest thing, right? Like they have 3 guys who just don't. Well, one guy that just doesn't fit with the other 2 guys, basically.
And you also have everyone else on 1-year deals, so
exactly
you have to get a roster. But we'll see what happens with Darvin Ham and the Lakers. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course YouTube. So definitely subscribe so you don't miss a great episode from us. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, and @UpLetterN_podcast, Facebook.com/UpAndUnderPodcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news as they occur. Definitely check that out if you haven't done so. Also, check out our website, UpAndUnderPodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode, so you don't have time to listen or watch the full episode. You can read about it on our website. Every episode is listed with the video, the audio, and the written version. So it's all in one source for you guys. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man, like we mentioned, we're here at the NBA Finals. The season is basically almost at the end. We're going to be crowning a champion very soon. And again, more off-season content will be on the way. But with that, that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.